Chapter 169. Extra, Their First Meeting 3. When they asked to borrow the restaurant's backyard, the owner readily agreed. Junk had been piled up in the corners, and the ground was overgrown with weeds, but it was still wide enough for a duel. Hamel and Vermouth stood facing each other. Hamel really didn't like how calm Vermouth looked, as if the hero didn't have anything to be nervous about. Vermouth was the hero of light. Hamel had heard this title many times before, but what did it even mean? Clicking his tongue, Hamel threw off his cloak. Beneath his cloak, Hamel was wearing a set of thin leather armor that wasn't too heavy and wouldn't get in the way of his movements. On top of that, he had a chainmail shirt that stopped short of his elbows and had several weapons attached here and there. Hamel took off each weapon, set them down, and even pulled off his chainmail. "Just how much lighter do you think you'll get just by taking that off?" Sienna, who had been watching with her back leaning against a wall, commented sarcastically with a smirk. From her perspective as a wizard, everything that Hamel was doing was crude and ignorant. If her body and equipment felt heavy, all Sienna needed to do was cast a spell to lighten them instead of taking them off. "Can't you just keep your trap shut for a moment?" Hamel complained. "What did you just say?" Sienna hissed. Hamel sighed. "Apart from you, no one else seems to be annoying me right now, so isn't it obvious that I'm talking to you?" Sienna's eyes widened at the smirk that Hamel had just shot her, and she turned to Vermouth to ask, "Vermouth, can't I just fight him in your stead?" "Sienna, you were the one who picked a fight with him first, weren't you?" Vermouth pointed out. "Why does it matter who picked a fight first?" "I just don't like that bastard, so I want to beat him up," Sienna demanded. "You've finally come up with a good idea. Do you know that, during my travels here and there, I've had to put up with a lot of people calling me a piece of trash? Want to know why that is? It's because I won't hesitate to smack someone down even if they are a fucking woman. If you have the confidence, get up here, I'll bury that pretty face of yours into the ground and leave you with a mug that only a mother would love," Hamel threatened with a ferocious expression. He had expected Sienna to explode in rage and charge over, but Sienna didn't react the way that he had predicted, instead staring at Hamel with wide eyes. Then, after blinking a few times, she cleared her throat and slightly turned her head away to avoid his gaze. Sienna stammered out, "Well, that's, your face isn't bad either, I guess. What are you saying all of a sudden?" Hamel responded in confusion. "No, thanks for calling me pretty. Despite your appearance, it seems that your eyes are quite sharp. Though I guess you were only pointing out the obvious. As such, I choose to forgive you," Sienna declared proudly. She drank a little bit earlier, but could she already be drunk? Hamel thought as he shot another glance at Sienna. Of course, Sienna hadn't actually gotten drunk off the tavern's wine. She secretly stole sips of Anissa's holy water every day, and sometimes she would train her alcohol tolerance by drinking with Anissa all night long. So there was no way that she would get drunk after just a few cups of wine. Sienna was just unused to getting compliments on her appearance. This couldn't be helped, as she had been abandoned in the Samar rainforest and was then raised by the elves. This meant that Sienna's family and neighbors were all members of a race that was praised as the most beautiful in the world. Beauty was something that the elves just took for granted, so there was no reason for them to praise one another's beauty. "As I thought, someone like me really is pretty, right?" Sienna thought to herself as she cleared her throat and unconsciously stroked her face. She had been around hundreds of elves since she was young, so it was hard for Sienna to be confident in her appearance. "Would you like to go first?" Vermouth spoke up. Vermouth was standing there casually, his hands empty as he hadn't even drawn his sword. For him to then say such a thing while looking so relaxed, Hamel's face couldn't help but contort into a scowl. "Aren't you going to draw the holy sword?" Hamel demanded. "You're not a demon folk or even a demonic beast," Vermouth pointed out. "Then you can just draw a different sword," Hamel growled. "If not a sword, then some other weapon." Hamel recalled all the rumors that he had heard about Vermouth. Vermouth Lionheart's skill in magic had reached a high enough level that he could also be compared to an archwizard. He was the master of the holy sword, but he could even wield various weapons besides the holy sword, and he kept those weapons in a subspace created by his spatial magic. Vermouth hummed thoughtfully for a few seconds before stretching out his hand. In response to his gesture, the space in front of him seemed to waver, and the hilt of a sword suddenly protruded from thin air. But it was just an ordinary sword. Hamel couldn't feel anything suspicious coming off of it, and its appearance wasn't anything remarkable either. It was just a long, straight sword. Stomp. Hamel gritted his teeth and lowered his stance. During Vermouth's momentary hesitation, Hamel could finally tell what exactly was bothering him about Vermouth's attitude. Vermouth seemed to feel like he didn't even need a weapon. The man had held such confidence, but he had still drawn a sword out of consideration for his opponent. How kind of him, Hamel thought with a sneer. Vermouth was the hero who was loved by everyone. Of course he would have such confidence. But that being said, Hamel didn't allow himself to be intimidated. The mana manipulation that Vermouth had shown earlier was indeed amazing. It was impossible for Hamel to manage such elaborate manipulations of mana while targeting a space so far away from his own body. However, if the target of the mana manipulation was inside of his own body, then Hamel still held confidence. Mana flowed out of his core and spread throughout his body in an instant. At the same moment, Hamel had already kicked off the ground and charged into Vermouth's range. "Oh ho," Sienna thought as her eyes sparkled. In that instant, the young archwizard noticed just how explosively Hamel had accelerated the mana under his control, and she realized that his sophisticated mana manipulation was actually far from being as crude as she had expected. His total amount of mana isn't that impressive. It's also not that pure. And just by mobilizing that amount of mana, his core is already being pushed to its limits, Sienna critiqued. What this meant was clear. Hamel's mana training scripture had surely been of poor quality. Sienna didn't know when the hell he had started training his mana, but it was obvious that this mercenary's mana training scripture wasn't as polished as the skills he had personally developed. But how could he have reached this level, with such a poorly developed core? Sienna marveled. No matter how hard Hamel had trained with his garbage training scripture, he should have still ended up with just a slightly better class of garbage. However, Sienna couldn't bring herself to think of this mercenary's mana manipulation as mere garbage. He might only be a mercenary, but his mana manipulation and mana control were smoother than any other knight she had seen thus far. Anise also began to concentrate as she stared at the clash between Hamel and Vermouth. She could now understand why Vermouth had stubbornly insisted on accepting Hamel as their comrade. He has potential, Anise muttered to herself. Hamel's potential was different from that of Sienna, Anise, and Molen. He was just a mercenary who had never received proper instruction. But he had slowly trained himself to where he was now by going through countless battlefields and surviving them all. The flow of his mana was irregular, but he had still managed to attune that turbid current with just his innate senses and focused exclusively on accelerating his movements instead of strengthening his sword force. But what if someone could correct that imperfection for him? Hamel twisted his body violently as he swung his sword. His slash hammered into Vermouth's side. But the moment that his attack drew close, his sword shook. One slash split into dozens of slashes that all surged forward simultaneously to chop Vermouth's body into pieces. Vermouth's body finally began to move in response to this slash. His sword flowed as smoothly as water as it approached Hamel's sword. Clang! As their mana collided with each other, a burst of sound was produced. Hamel's mana recoiled backward. After just one clash, his sword force had been destroyed in a single moment. Hamel squeezed strength back into his throbbing hands and grabbed hold of his mana, which was in a mess from the backlash. Then he raised his sword force once more. The blade of mana that returned to cover his sword immediately underwent a conversion. The blade burst into flames. Then, as if the sword had been doused in oil, these flames instantly grew to a great size and tried to swallow Vermouth. The moment she saw this, Sienna shook her head and thought, "It's over." Anise also let out a short sigh. She then prepared a recovery spell just in case of some unforeseen circumstances. As for Molen, he just stood there with his large eyes peeled open, watching until the end. My flames. Hamel realized something was off. His extreme concentration lengthened his perception of time. He was forced to watch as pure white flames wrapped around Vermouth's body. Embers scattered off of Vermouth's shoulders like a lion's mane. Vermouth's sword hadn't even moved, but the pure white flames he had summoned consumed Hamel's blaze. Was this the end? Hamel desperately held on to his consciousness. There wasn't even any backlash of mana. Instead, all the mana he poured into the flames disappeared. Even so, Hamel forced his body to move. He had gone through hundreds of battlefields, survived numerous close brushes with death, and overcome countless challenges. His body, which had been with Hamel through all these struggles, resisted the inevitable defeat. He still had a dagger hidden beneath his wrist. If he couldn't win with a sword, then Hamel was desperately planning to get in close and stab Vermouth in the side, but... boom. A wall of flames swept across the ground towards him, and Hamel was blown backward by the impact. Unable to even arrest his fall, Hamel landed on the ground face first. "Isn't that a little too harsh?" Sienna muttered with a shake of her head. Should she cast a healing spell? Anise considered the question for a moment before lowering her outstretched hand. Anise justified her decision. If Vermouth doesn't show the clear gap that lies between them, that mercenary will just try again and again. "Amazing!" Molen shouted in a loud voice. Sienna and Anise both turned to look at Molen, startled by the loud shout that had erupted from beside them. Molen continued shouting, "That spirit of not giving up until the very end, he truly is a warrior." Before being blown away by the approaching wave of flames, Molen saw Hamel throw his dagger. Vermouth had been confident of his victory and hadn't expected that tiny dagger to pierce through the flames and come flying at him. But in reality, that dagger didn't do any damage to Vermouth's body. However, it had managed to slightly brush by Vermouth's sleeve before completely burning up into ash. Vermouth stared at the mark on his sleeve in amazement. To think that Hamel would truly be able to land a blow on him. Although there might not be any wounds left on his body, the fact that his opponent could leave a cut on the hem of his sleeve even when there was such a gap between them was enough to surprise Vermouth. But such a surprise only caused Vermouth to laugh for a moment before he addressed the fallen Hamel. "It seems that I'm stronger than you." With a thin smile on his face, Vermouth approached Hamel and stretched out his hand. Hamel's face hurt. His nose felt like it had been broken and the inside of his mouth was filled with dirt. His body, which had been struck by the flames, was also screaming in protest. Hamel had lost. There were no excuses that he could make for such a crushing defeat. He didn't even know when he had last lost so completely. Could a person like Vermouth truly exist in this world? Just how could it even be possible? "Shut up," Hamel snarled. The outcome of their duel wouldn't change even if they fought once more. However, Hamel couldn't just admit defeat. Seizing hold of his dizzied consciousness, Hamel glared at Vermouth. Looking up at his gray hair and golden eyes, the bastard was just standing in front of Hamel, still clad in his white flames. Vermouth had extended his hand towards him. What? Was this guy offering a handshake? Instead of accepting the handshake, Hamel raised his hand and grabbed his nose. Crack. Wrenching his nose straight, Hamel held it in place until the nosebleed had stopped. Looking down at the sword in his right hand, the blade was gone. That white flame had shattered his sword into pieces. Was mana really capable of instantly exploding a sword into pieces like that? No, it wasn't just the mana. It had actually started from the very first time their swords had collided with each other. Vermouth had seen right through Hamel's sword techniques the moment before their blades had met and had used this to destroy Hamel's blade. Vermouth was in a different class. Hamel wasn't an idiot. He had known that there would be a massive gap between himself and Vermouth. Even if they fought hundreds or even thousands of matches, Hamel didn't have any confidence in being able to beat Vermouth even once. But Hamel refused to accept this truth. It felt like the moment he accepted this, he would also have to admit that he would never be able to defeat Vermouth. Fuck. Okay. Let's fight again. I haven't lost. Hamel growled. Hamel hated losing. Defeat may have been familiar to him starting from a young age, but it was still a disgusting and unpleasant thing that he refused to get used to, no matter how many times it had happened. He had lost everything at a young age and started living as a mercenary. Over that time, Hamel had gotten better at fighting in order to survive. He wasn't a good fighter from the very beginning. Hamel had experienced numerous defeats, then at some point victories began to outnumber his losses. Hamel couldn't allow himself to get used to losing. Ever since he was young, Hamel had blindly followed this edict. If you can't accept it, then fine, Vermouth agreed with a nod as he withdrew his hand. Vermouth then took a few steps backward as he continued to stare at Hamel. Hamel dropped the broken sword onto the ground and clenched his fists. If a sword wouldn't work, then maybe he could use his fists? Hamel was confident in his brawling. Even before he had become a mercenary, he had often boxed with the other children in his village, and after becoming a mercenary he swung his fists all the more often. Up to now, Hamel had always thought of himself as a genius. He had enough talent that it made sense for him to do so. Ever since he was young, he hadn't felt any real difficulty when it came to learning new things, and his skills had also improved faster than the rest. Even after becoming a mercenary, his confidence in himself hadn't changed. On the contrary, he had built trust in himself, which reinforced his own self-confidence. I've never seen a brat who's as good with a knife as you. Did you just say that you can already sense mana? Is that sword light? That's impossible. All of the mercenaries who had met the young Hamel were shocked by him. Some of them grew jealous of Hamel's talent and had even tried to cripple him for it. When it came to the envy that followed geniuses, Hamel had always been on the side of the ones being envied. Although he had become familiar with the cries of shock coming from his surroundings, as well as people calling him a genius, Hamel hadn't allowed himself to become complacent in his arrogance. He hadn't neglected to work hard and train. That was how he had been able to cultivate such a level of skill. But his opponent was the hero Vermouth Lionheart. So it only made sense for him to lose. The truth was that having any expectation of winning in the first place was the most absurd thing. However, Hamel couldn't allow himself to lose like this. Without even having been able to land a proper attack on Vermouth, he couldn't allow himself to admit defeat, even as he felt this overwhelming gap in their skills. Even if it wasn't an equal fight, there at least had to be an exchange of blows. Even if it meant fighting hundreds or thousands of times, Hamel had to believe that he would be able to win at least once or twice. "Hey," Hamel eventually called out. Now he didn't even have the strength left to pick his body off the ground. They had already fought twice and Hamel had lost both times. He hadn't even been able to brush the hem of Vermouth's clothes like he had in the first match. It wasn't just because of those pure white flames either. Hamel had also been completely defeated when they competed solely with their bodies. All of the techniques that Hamel had held such trust and confidence in had done anything to Vermouth. Hamel continued, "I'm a lot weaker than you. So just why do you want me to become your comrade?" Hamel felt like there wasn't any reason for which he could possibly accept this offer. Having struggled so hard, he had realized just how much of a gap there was between them. Even if he did become one of Vermouth's companions, it was clear that he would just be a burden holding on to their ankles. Hamel didn't know how to use magic, and of course he didn't know how to use holy magic either. He also wasn't as barbarically huge as Molen. That was why he definitely couldn't accept it. Was it because he was strong? No, Hamel was weak compared to them. Was it because he was a genius? Obviously not. So what exactly did they want from him? Why did this monstrous bastard come looking for Hamel to invite him to become his companion and was even willing to fight with Hamel 3 times? "Because I need you," Vermouth stated. But Vermouth's reply just sounded like a joke to him. "That's why I'm asking why the fuck you need me? You're obviously stronger than me." Hamel let out a roar as he slammed his fist into the ground. He had lost. He had never had any chance at winning. After being defeated by Vermouth in all 3 fights, all Hamel could feel was rage at himself. "If I won, you would become my comrade. Isn't that what you promised?" Vermouth reminded him. "But I just can't understand it. If you told them you wanted them as your comrade, there aren't just 1 or 2 strong bastards who would be flattered by the offer. So why the hell would you come to me with this?" Hamel demanded as he raised his head to glare at Vermouth. Instead of replying immediately, Vermouth gazed at Hamel with calm eyes. In the face of that stare, Hamel unconsciously swallowed a gulp. Those shining gold eyes were unwaveringly calm, but they were also so intense that it was as if they could penetrate through everything they saw and reveal the truth hidden inside his heart. "You're the last one," Vermouth's lips parted. "So let's go there together, Hamel." Vermouth offered his hand to Hamel once more, but Hamel didn't grab hold of the hand immediately. Since he had lost, then all he needed to do was follow Vermouth. If he could just think of it like that, then Hamel would be more at ease, but Hamel needed a different reason to agree to go with Vermouth. "You rotten bastard," Hamel cursed. Picking up the shattered pieces of his pride, Hamel collected himself. He then firmly accepted the fact that he wasn't a genius. After doing this, Hamel looked up at Vermouth. Just what are you planning on doing?" Hamel asked. "We're going to cross the sea and journey to Helmuth," Vermouth answered. "None of the ships in this port are willing to sail to Helmuth. If I tell them I'll be going with them, they'll set sail." Vermouth was probably right. Hamel let out a hollow laugh at this. None of the merchant ships were willing to sail to Helmuth because the sea that lay between was far too dangerous. Beneath the ceiling, the waters were filled with violent monsters and demonic beasts, and above the ceiling, black wizards and undead sailed the waters in their ghost ships. If there was a sufficient escort force, the ships might be willing to depart, but a major battle had been fought in this city just a few days before. The only ones still full of energy were the clumsy, young knights who had just been promoted to fill the empty spots left by the dead. Among the surviving knights and mercenaries, the only one volunteering to go to the hellish place that was Helmuth was Hamel. However, if Vermouth and his companions said they would be taking a ship there, all of the knights blinded by the legend of the mighty hero would surely flock to board the same ship. Even disregarding their numbers, the merchant ships would be willing to set sail for Helmuth as long as Vermouth agreed to board their ship. "And what do you intend to do in Helmuth?" Hamel continued. "We're going to kill the demon kings," Vermouth replied without any hesitation. "First we're going to kill the demon king of carnage. Then we'll kill the demon king of cruelty, and after that we'll kill the demon king of fury. Once we've killed the demon king of incarceration, all that's left is to kill the demon king of destruction." Vermouth still hadn't withdrawn his hand. "In order to kill the demon kings, we need your strength," Vermouth earnestly requested. "Hamel Dinahs, without you I know we won't be able to slay all of the demon kings." Sounded absurd. Did Vermouth really just say that he was going to kill all the demon kings? As the hero chosen by the holy sword, it sounded plausible, but what the hell did Vermouth mean by saying that he wouldn't be able to kill the demon kings without Hamel? If that's the case, then it can't be helped. Hamel gave in with a sigh. Was Vermouth just soothing the sore feelings of a loser? That was most probably the case. But did he really have any reason to do so? Hamel didn't want to spend any more time thinking about it. The more he thought about it, the more his head hurt. "Well, I was just looking for a way to cross the sea," Hamel admitted as an excuse to take Vermouth's hand. What a prideful pretense, Sienna, who had still been leaning with her back against the wall, spat out in an attention-catching voice. Beside her, Molen was looking at Vermouth and Hamel with thick streams of tears pouring from his eyes. Then, with his arms held wide open, Molen approached Vermouth and Hamel to say, "Warriors on different paths have now joined together to work towards the same purpose. Now that we're comrades, we may have been born on different days, but the day we achieve our ultimate goal will be the same." While shedding hot-blooded tears, Molen embraced Hamel and Vermouth. "Are you done?" Anise asked as she lifted her empty holy water flask and turned it upside down over her mouth to pour out the last remaining drops of holy water. "Hamel, because we had to deal with your stubbornness, I wasn't able to hold our evening service. Just how are you going to take responsibility for that? What do you expect me to do about that?" Hamel asked grumpily. "Allow me to enlighten you. Anise likes to drink. You know what that means, right? She wants you to go buy her something to drink," Sienna advised Hamel with a giggle as she waved her finger. A gust of wind blew away the dust clinging to Hamel's body. Since we're welcoming a new companion today, then even God should forgive me for skipping today's service," Anise confirmed Sienna's suggestion. Hamel eyed the two women warily. "What is with you two? Why are you acting so friendly all of a sudden? Didn't you say that you hated me and that I was a piece of shit?" "Hamel, I have never said that I hated you or called you a piece of shit. If I had to say it, then I might admit that you are an asshole, but is there anyone in this world who can really swear to love everyone else in existence? As long as you're human, you can still think that someone else is an asshole. And as a saint, I am no exception to that," Anise confessed as she stared at Hamel through her narrowed eyes. "As such, while people can still think of each other as assholes and slightly act as assholes to each other, we still need to get along and come to understand each other. As for us in particular, since we'll have to fight together from now on while placing our lives in each other's hands, we should get to know each other even more deeply than in an ordinary relationship." "Oh, all right," Hamel stammered, overwhelmed by the sermon. "And there's nothing like drinking together to get to know each other. The reason alcohol exists is that by making people intoxicated, it allows people to reveal their true selves without any deception. So by getting drunk together we can come to understand one another more deeply. That's why alcohol is actually holy water," Anise concluded. "That's why you should buy some expensive and good quality alcohol," Sienna added helpfully from the side. "Or else, could it be that you don't want to drink with us? Did you prefer it when we disliked you earlier?" Anise accused. Hamel defended himself. "It's just suspicious that your attitude has changed so quickly." We thought that you were just a slob without any skills who made his living by talking big. But having seen you fight with Vermouth, we've come to appreciate you, Anise admitted honestly. Your persistence is also pretty good, Sienna complimented. Molan chimed in. Your eyes that burned hot until the very end were truly fitting for a warrior. What strange guys. Hamel thought as he freed himself from Molan's arms. Do you like to drink as well? Hamel asked uncertainly, glancing at Vermouth. Something seemed to have amused Vermouth as he'd kept the smile from earlier. I don't dislike it, Vermouth responded. That's quite an ambiguous answer, Hamel complained. Anise explained, although he phrased it like that, Sir Vermouth has never refused a drink. If that's the case, then let's go get some drinks, Hamel said, recalling what Vermouth had said earlier. Have you eaten yet? Then let's have a meal together. Then just like Vermouth had, he turned around and started leading the way forward. That bastard, he won't kick a rock at me, will he? Hamel was suddenly concerned that a stone might come flying at the back of his head, but Vermouth didn't suddenly kick a stone at him like Hamel had done before. Ha ha ha. Instead, the sound of laughter rang out from behind him. Chapter 170. The Competition 1. The Lionheart's main house had gone through some changes. First, the patriarch, who had been away from the main house for a few years, had now returned. Just like when he had left the Black Lion Castle, Gilead was still noticeably thin, and Ancilla cried her eyes out, forgetting about dignity for a moment. Her husband's return wasn't the only reason Ancilla bawled. Her children, who had left her arms for a long time, had also returned. After attending several funerals along with Gilead, Seal had come back along with Cyan, who had been training with the captains of the Black Lion Castle. Giving up on their original plan, the 3rd Division of the Black Lion Knights led by Carmen didn't leave the main estate due to a request from Gilead and Klein. They asked Carmen to help train the White Lion Knights. The White Lion Knights were already among the best knights on the continent, but the rebellion started by Uad was enough to make the loyalty of the White Lion Knights waver, since they were usually very proud of the fact that they served the Lionhearts. Therefore, the Lionhearts needed to make a strong display in order to regain that respect and reverence. The simplest method to achieve this was bringing in a knight who, on the one hand, was indisputably strong, and on the other hand, lacked the elitism normally displayed by pure-blood Lionhearts. In other words, they had to be the type to not discriminate between their subordinates, and they had to be enthusiastic about teaching. Carmen Lionheart, the strongest person in the Lionhearts, was naturally considered to be the best fit for this role, so she continued to stay in the main estate and mentor the White Lion Knights instead of returning to the Black Lion Castle. As a result, the White Lion Knights' quarters beside the main estate's training area had been extended. Carmen's office had been set up next to the office of the White Lion Order's commander on the 1st floor. Overall, the facility had become much more elegant than before. All of the renovations were Ancilla's plan to make the Knights grateful and proud. The White Lion Knights facility was great in the first place, but the major renovation led by Ancilla made the compound outstanding. While extending the White Lion Knights quarter, the annex was also demolished. Ancilla built a new annex in the place where Eugene had previously lived, right next to the main estate, saying that family should be family even though they did not share all that much blood. The main estate and the annex were separate, but every floor was connected with a passageway, enabling people to easily move between the main estate and the annex. Aside from these renovations, various new training equipment was also installed in the training area. Even the Lionheart Forest, where the World Tree's seedlings had completely taken roots, also went through a renovation. Some had worried that the elves would be against it, but the elves hadn't forgotten that they were under the Lionheart's protection. Maybe due to that reason, the elves themselves had picked up shovels and axes and helped with the forest's renovation. I think it's a tiny little bit overkill, Carmen awkwardly said. She was in her office, which she had decorated to suit her preference from top to bottom. One wall was fitted with a whiskey display. Not that Carmen drank whiskey in any shape or form, she hated both its smell and taste. She liked sweet beverages, warm milk and tea that calmed her, rather than bitter alcohol that tasted like tree bark washed with soap. There was a wine display next to the whiskey display. Just like her whiskey display, every wine she had put on her display as interior decoration was a top-class product. The highest quality wood and metals were used to build the displays, and they were decorated with jewels. The displays even came with artifacts that controlled temperature and humidity, creating a perfect environment for each type of alcohol. This was the kind of display normally owned by rich habitual drinkers who had far too much money. Therefore, the wines inside the displays were luxury items, some of the highest-priced wines money could buy. Whiskey and wine became more expensive over time, and if Eugene put together the age of the alcohol bottles on Carmen's shelves, forget about Hamel's age, it would even surpass the age of most high-ranking demon folks. Of course, Carmen also didn't drink wine. Well, no, unlike whiskey, she at least drank some of the wine because she enjoyed both sweet ice wine and cool sparkling wine. Aside from those, however, did she care for any other type? Not in the slightest. She couldn't care less if the wine was red, white, or rainbow. As far as she was concerned, grape juice and apple juice were the better choice. So, why did she even have those massively expensive shelves? Naturally, it was because Carmen thought that displaying quality alcohol was essential in order to show dignity. Although she didn't like wine or whiskey, she certainly liked the way she looked when she held a wine or whiskey glass. Carmen's thoughts remained the same when it came to cigars. Inside the drawers of her magnificent office desk, cigars that would never see a lighter were neatly organized. It was a given, but all of her cigars were handmade by famous artisans. She even had her cigar case and cigar cutter custom-made, engraved with a black lion and a silver lion. Apart from those, there were also a bunch of books which, obviously, she didn't read, filling a third wall. Finally, the wall behind Carmen's desk was engraved with the big symbols of the lion hearts and the black lion knights. Armor that she never wore was standing beside her window like decorations along with a flag. To sum it up, the room was more overkill than any other room Eugene had ever visited. And Carmen, the very person who had decorated the room and was currently sitting in her chair with her legs on the desk, had the absolute gall to utter the word overkill. Eugene could no longer think properly. Is that so? Eugene stuttered. Yes, there is no reason to also train the elves. Carmen nodded. Well, I didn't tell them to. They volunteered, Eugene answered, shrugging. Just like Eugene had said, the elves in the forest had started training by themselves. The incident of Lavera being helplessly kidnapped by Iris had been a wake-up call for the elves and motivated Signard, who had deep grudges against Iris. The elves had volunteered to train, so several training facilities had been installed to grant the elves' requests during the renovation. Signard himself had begun to teach swordsmanship to the elves, and the White Lion Knights and Black Lion Knights assisted Signard in that endeavor. What I mean by overkill is... Carmen laid her cigar on the ashtray, unable to say much. The beautiful ashtray had never held cigarette ashes, and it never would in the future. Aha! Eugene realized what Carmen wanted to say. You are saying this because of White Tower Master, right? Carmen bitterly nodded. In Eugene's perspective, they were the same, considering how they both didn't act their age and were completely disgraceful. Yet Carmen and Melkith were surprisingly on bad terms. Eugene thought that they were probably feeling a sense of kinship to each other and self-loathing at the same time. Since they were similar, they became more conscious of each other, but they looked hideous from a third-party perspective. No, rather than loathing, are they being competitive with each other? Eugene gaped. When Melkith had worn a mink coat, Carmen had worn a fluffier mink jacket. When Carmen had worn a leather jacket, Melkith had worn a shinier leather coat. I know elves have great aptitude for spirit-summoning magic, but since the White Tower Master is an outsider, it is a bit too much for her to teach the Lionheart's people. Carmen crossed her legs on her desk. Well, they wanted to learn it. If they don't like swordsmanship or hand-to-hand combat, it's for the best that they learn spirit-summoning magic. Besides, their teacher is the greatest spirit summoner in history. Eugene nodded. After the lightning flame incident, Melkith could freely come in and out of the Lionheart Forest on some level, but she must have felt the need to prove her worth when her visits became frequent. She had persuaded the elves in the forest and taught them about spirit-summoning magic, so Melkith had even stayed in the forest for several days, using the lesson excuse. It is a great method to make the Lionhearts more powerful, but, she really lacks dignity. Carmen chose her words carefully. Pardon? Eugene asked with a baffled expression. Well, when I went on a stroll last night, I passed by the artificial lake of the forest. Carmen stuttered, unable to continue speaking. As if she was feeling really awkward, she fidgeted with her fingers and turned her head away a little as she continued. And the White Tower Master was sitting at the center of the lake without any clothes. What? Eugene couldn't believe his ears. There was no no elves who were watching. The White Tower Master must be really thorough about such matters, because she created a magic barrier that prevents people from recognizing her. Without eyes that aren't as sharp as mine, they wouldn't be able to see the White Tower Master behave strangely. Anyhow, she is really disgraceful in real life. Is that so? Eugene wasn't sure what he was supposed to say. Of course, she didn't do anything strange. I did get out of the area right after I saw her, but she looked serious and her mana flow was truly beautiful. I assume she was meditating to unite her ego and the outside world, to develop her spirit summoning magic. Carmen spoke and cleared her throat. But, ordinary people. Well, the White Tower Master isn't an ordinary person, but if she knows about shame. Was it morally right for Carmen to speak about shame? Shouldn't she not cultivate while sitting naked, under the night sky with the shining moon? Or am I failing to understand her cultivation method because I'm neither a wizard nor a spirit summoner? Carmen sincerely asked. Eugene had no response for this. Is such a training method common for wizards and spirit summoners? Eugene, you are a wizard and a spirit summoner, so do you also secretly train by using the same method? Hamel. Tempest called Eugene through his head. If so, then are all the elves who learn spirit summoning from the White Tower Master going to go through such training? I don't mind, if they do that in the Lionheart Forest, but if they train while there is a guest in the main estate. Fashly, I do believe you are sensible enough, however, if somebody sees you while you are busy uniting your ego and the outside world as you cultivate. Carmen carefully chose her words. I suggest that we assassinate Melkith Alhaya. Tempest quickly whispered to Eugene. She is dragging spirit summoner's reputation through the mud. Look at this bizarre woman right now. Even she is confused because she can't understand the White Tower Master. Eugene was speechless. Just like I told you the last time, the story about how a spirit summoner can reach a higher level by communicating with spirits in a naked state is nothing more than a groundless superstition. I lament at the fact that such a superstition maniac is a grand spirit summoner. Eugene began to speak. She is a spirit summoner who signed contracts with the Earth and Lightning Spirit Kings. But why is she developing her spirit summoning magic on the lake surface? Is she following some kind of superstition that a forced communication with spirits for which the summoner has no affinity with strengthens their connection with the respective spirits? I never trained without clothes, nor did I ever feel any particular desire to train that way. Eugene tried to speak as calmly as possible. How could such a grand spirit summoner? Every being who has transcended humanity is mad. Like how Carmen Lionheart is. Melkith Alhaya is also mad. Tempest had just realized something on his own. The White Tower Master is the weird one. Other wizards and spirit summoners don't do such crazy stuff. I will make sure to discuss with the elves about this matter, and warn the White Tower Master too. Eugene firmly answered. After hearing Eugene's answer, Carmen heaved a sigh of relief and suddenly pulled out something from her desk's drawer. Pong. Carmen flicked open the black golden DuPont lighter with a crisp and clear sound. Pong. Pong. It's cool. Eugene nodded as he understood Carmen's intention. Pong. It sounds clearer than Iris. Eugene looked at her lighter. It's custom-made. Carmen finally looked satisfied as she nodded. Eugene tried to keep his feet on the ground, because he hadn't visited Carmen early in the morning to have this kind of conversation. Isn't it time for you to pretend that you have no choice and tell me what the hell is up? Eugene cut to the chase. I don't know what you are talking about. Carmen looked away. I will keep asking even if you pretend to not know anything. Eugene kept looking at her. Young blood lion. Can you handle the truth? Carmen locked her fingers together. Handle Shandle, who gives a damn. I'm already used to the damn title of blood lion and don't care when others call me blood lion. So I won't stand down even if you call me blood lion. Eugene smiled only with his mouth. Elf sure as hell had a keen sense of hearing. When Carmen had conferred the title of blood lion to Eugene in front of the warp gate, only the black lions and Lavera had been present, but all the elves in the forest heard Carmen. That was how the elves ended up calling Eugene blood lion, and the title naturally spread to the servants and the White Lion Knights. No matter how much Eugene shivered when he heard the title, All the people in the Lionheart domain now called him Eugene, the Blood Lion. Well, the Blood Lion Eugene is better than stupid Hamel, I guess. Eugene bit his lips. Glaring at Carmen, he clenched his fists to control his goosebumps. Besides, you're giving off more signals than a lighthouse. I have never done that. Carmen tightly grabbed her lighter. What is the mysterious experience you went through in your childhood dozens of years ago? Eugene went on. When we returned to the main estate, you kept clicking your pocket watch in the carriage every time Sir Alcester mentioned the word dragon. Eugene continued. Wanting you to notice and you actually noticing are slightly different things, Carmen solemnly said. I can't see that slight difference, so I have to hear about it directly. I have told you multiple times, but I can't tell you my experience myself due to an important promise. Carmen desperately tried to change the topic, but no new topic came to her mind. If I knew things were going to turn out this way, I would have pulled out my DuPont lighter later. His head would have been filled with the desire to have a DuPont lighter instead of questions if I let him hear my lighters click in this kind of situation. Carmen thought in regret. Gosh. Eugene sighed as he leaned against the sofa. For the past couple of days he had been visiting and following Carmen to ask about the dragon, but Carmen refused to answer. At this point, Eugene had no choice but to believe Carmen. It was certain that Carmen had received the heaven genocide from the dragon. Judging from how she kept trying to change the subject, unable to say something clear, she had likely made a promise with the dragon using Draconic. Can you give me a hint if you can't directly say it? Eugene calmly asked. The encounter. Carmen hesitated as she fell deep in thought, figuring out if she could speak about what came to her thoughts or not. After trying to say something several times, she closed her mouth and frowned. She can't speak in spite of her will, Eugene observed. The promise made with a dragon using Draconic is absolute. Tempest explained. You call yourself the fucking Wind Spirit King, but how can you know 0 dragons? Eugene growled in his thought. I know a dragon, however, I can't talk about the party with whom I signed a contract even though I'm a Spirit King. So don't count on my help in searching for the dragon, Hamel. Tempest's excuse sounded pathetic, but it was understandable. Since wind existed everywhere in the world, Eugene would have been able to obtain all the information if he could use the low-ranking wind spirits with Tempest's help to search. I stayed with the Dragonic family when I was young. Carmen finally spoke after a long time. I told you about this before, but I was Alchester's martial arts teacher. I don't like weapons like swords or spears, so I taught Alchester hand-to-hand combat. The Dragonic Patriarch at the time taught me the Dragonic style, but it wasn't much help to me. Eugene had heard this in the carriage too. Alchester was a fast learner. He was a 5-year-old kid at the time, but he was unbelievably mature and he never whined about my lessons. Carmen reminisced. You met the dragon in the Dragonic estate? Eugene tilted his head. Although he was mature, he had a childish side too. The 5-year-old Alchester was a horrible child who used to eat his booger. Carmen closed her eyes. All Eugene heard was way too much information about the best knight in the Empire. Then will I have to go to the Dragonic estate? Eugene muttered to himself. Eugene the Blood Lion, why are you interested in dragons? Carmen looked at Eugene. Who isn't interested in dragons? Eugene shrugged. Dragons were mythical creatures who hadn't shown themselves to the world for 300 years because they had sustained immense damage during the war against the Demon Kings. Half of the great race had been massacred by the Demon Kings of Incarceration and Destruction. No, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that the Demon King of Destruction alone had massacred the race. The Demon King of Incarceration had indeed killed several dragons in the First War, but he had stopped fighting with the dragons rather early. Then, as if filling in for the Demon King of Incarceration, the Demon King of Destruction had shown up at the battlefield, killing half of the race. Eugene didn't know what those battles had been like, but while Hamel had been wandering in Helmuth, he had met a dying dragon who had escaped after sustaining injuries from the battle against the Demon King of Incarceration. Unable to escape Helmuth, the dragon had been waiting for his death inside a crudely made dungeon. The dragon pulled out his dragon heart for Vermouth and his companions and left them his last words. You can't fight with the Demon King of Destruction. When Hamel had seen the Demon King of Destruction from afar, Hamel had realized how true and serious the dragon's warning was. Even now, Eugene couldn't recall what the thing he had seen looked like exactly, because it had been more like a blur of color. Although he wasn't sure that the thing was the demon king of destruction, the thing made him ask himself, what else could be called if not destruction? The thing brought overwhelming fear and despair to its enemy, making its enemies powerless to fight back. The dragons had been the ones who had attempted to fend off the demon king of destruction. Perhaps it was because of that event that the dragons who had survived the front line in the war had gone into seclusion to heal their injuries and the mental trauma, never revealing themselves for 300 years. Oryx, that bastard, wasn't remotely half-dragon, so why was there a dragon in the dragonic estate? Did the dragon come to see the maniac who proclaimed himself to be half-dragon and was respected for 300 years as the heir of a dragon? Eugene wondered. It sounded plausible. Can you give me advice on how to enter the dragonic estate? Eugene cautiously asked. Alcester won't refuse if you ask him for a tour of the mansion. Carmen nodded. Will that be enough to meet the dragon? Eugene's eyes shone. I stayed in Alchester's house, as his teacher. Carmen repeated. Okay, I won't be able to meet the dragon as an ordinary guest. Then what should I do? Shall I become a temporary teacher like you? Lady Carmen. Eugene mumbled to himself, glancing at Carmen. Alcester has a young son who is 10 years old right now. Carmen straightened her posture and stared at Eugene. If you show exceptional ability in front of Alcester, I will ask Gilead to arrange a cultural exchange between the two clans. Huh. Eugene chuckled as he looked at Carmen. I think I made it pretty clear that I will never participate in today's competition. Are you the one saying this, or are you speaking for the patriarch? I'll say I speak for the Lionhearts. Carmen smiled, putting a cigar in her mouth. The competition was caused by a squabble. The White Dragon Knights, whose commander was Alcester, had been protecting the Lionheart main estate from the fence for a month, but the White Dragon Knights and the White Lion Knights had gotten into a quarrel regarding the matter. To sum up, low-ranking White Dragon Knights had been caught bad-mouthing the Lionhearts. They gossiped about how the Lionhearts were not high and mighty like before and the clan was rotting from inside. The Knights had even smirked at the Lionhearts, saying that they always boasted about how they were the great hero's heirs, but they were now under the Imperial Knights' protection because they got scared by whatever Rakshasa princess who ran away from Helmuth. When the White Lion Knights had heard the White Dragon Knights gossiping, the White Lion Knights had challenged them to a duel, which had ended in a tie. That wasn't the end of the squabble, however, because some other knights joined in when they heard the story, making the duel bigger. Alcester had tried to cover up the incident, but the White Dragon Knights were loyal to the Keel Emperor, not Alcester. As if they had secretly been ordered by the Emperor, the White Dragon Knights who weren't assigned to protect the Lionheart estate came by and challenged the White Lion Knights to a duel. Since the incident had progressed this far, the Patriarch had been unable to just let this slide, so he himself had stepped up and proposed an official competition between the White Lion Knights and the White Dragon Knights. Depending on the outcome, the loser was going to unreservedly apologize and provide appropriate compensation to the winner. Therefore, 10 knights were chosen from each knightly order to fight in today's competition. I'm not a White Lion Knight. Eugene reluctantly spoke. The Patriarch and his children are the commanders of the White Lion Knights. You know that, don't you? Carmen smiled. Still, it is too much for a member of the main family to participate. The White Lion Knights would also be uncomfortable if they saw their lord meddling in their problem. Eugene tried really hard to persuade her. They would be uncomfortable if Cyan, the official successor, stepped up. You aren't the heir though, and you've even given up the succession right, haven't you? Besides, young White Lion Knights revere you, so their spirits will be lifted if you participate in the competition. Carmen spoke flawlessly without a pause, so Eugene could tell that she had been planning to persuade him in the first place. Eugene clicked his tongue and tilted his head. That's a cheap move. Carmen smiled in satisfaction, swinging the cigar in her hand left and right. Call it a tactic. Chapter 171. The Competition 2. As Eugene approached the closed door to open it, he felt muted footsteps move away on the other side. Eugene stood and waited in front of the door for a few moments. Then, seeing how the door remained closed, the sounds of someone slowly sneaking drew closer once more. Eugene immediately pulled the door open. Kaya! Eek! 2 foolish-sounding screams rang out. Eugene stared through the open doorway with a sullen face. On the other side of the door he saw Desra, who had jumped back a few steps and was now caught in a guilty posture, and Seal, who was keeping up an impudent expression as if she refused to admit to having just made such an embarrassing sound. The Kaya had come from Seal while the Eek had come from Desra. "What are you doing here?" Eugene demanded. "What do you think I was doing?" "I was just passing through this hallway," Seal blatantly lied as she quickly calmed her rapidly beating heart from the ensuing shock. Seal glanced sideways at Desra, who was still shrinking backward, and scolded her. "Stupid Desra, why did you make such an unsightly noise?" Huh. Desra stammered. "You started making noises like an idiot just now," Seal accused. "I'm talking about those ridiculous screams, Kaya and Eek. No matter how surprised you were, isn't it going too far to scream twice in a row?" What do you mean by that?" Desra protested. "I didn't scream twice. Also, strictly speaking, the sound I made just now was more of a gasp rather than a scream." "No, you definitely screamed twice. Thanks to that, I also froze out of surprise," Seal insisted, having no intention of admitting that she had let out any scream. At the same time, a question was brewing in the corner of her heart. "I was definitely paying attention to any signs of his presence, so how?" Eugene had also noticed that Seal was reading the traces of his presence. So to tease Seal, he had hidden all signs of his presence and waited at the door. No matter how keen Seal's senses were, it was impossible for Seal to detect him if Eugene was determined to hide his presence. "I only screamed once," Desra argued. "Desra, do you, Esquire, really dare to refute me, your senior officer?" Seal demanded as she glared at Desra with a stern expression. It was just as Seal had said. As part of the massive recruitment drive enacted by the Knights of the Black Lion, Desra followed her dreams and joined the 3rd Division of the Black Lion Knights, led by Carmen Lionheart, whom Desra so admired. Thanks to that, Desra had fortunately been able to don the uniform of the Black Lion Knights. But unfortunately, Desra's skills were actually quite lacking for a member of the Black Lions. In the end, Desra became an apprentice and an assistant to Carmen's disciple, Seal. This is just absurd. Even if you are my senior officer, Lady Seal, I can't accept being accused of doing something that I didn't do, Desra argued stubbornly. "If you keep this up, then I won't take care of you the next time we head out together," Seal warned as she stared at Desra with narrowed eyes. At these words, Desra's pupils began wavering with indecision. Just by listening to their conversation, one might feel like Seal was a paragon of absurdity for issuing such a threat. But unexpectedly, Seal had indeed been taking care of Desra in many ways after she recently joined the Black Lions as her assistant. "You're right," Desra confessed with an embarrassed expression. "The truth is that I did scream twice." "Hear that?" Seal boasted smugly as she glanced over at Eugene. "So what do you want from me?" Eugene reminded her. "Why do you keep popping in and out of Lady Carmen's office lately?" Seal asked as the smile that had just been pasted onto her face disappeared. Gazing at Eugene's face with a suspicious expression, Seal demanded, "You can't be thinking of becoming Lady Carmen's disciple, can you? Is there something wrong with that?" Eugene asked. "You can't," Seal firmly rejected. "You're already receiving special guidance from Sir Genos. If you accept instruction from Lady Carmen on top of that, that would just be too greedy and unfair." "That's right, Sir Eugene. Lady Carmen is already very busy with just instructing the 3rd Division." Desra backed Seal up while stumbling to address Eugene as a sir. However, since she now had to use honorifics whenever she had to address Cyan and Seal, it would be awkward for her to not use sir when addressing Eugene as well. So now that she had become a member of the 3rd Division, she would just have to do her best to get used to addressing those from the main family as sir or lady. "It must be nice to keep receiving such affection from all over the place," Eugene commented as he glanced over at Carmen, who had propped her legs up onto the table. Poof poof. Carmen was idly flicking open and closing her DuPont lighter, while she tried to hold back the smile that was threatening to spread across her lips. "It's slowly getting to the scheduled start of the competition, so what are you guys doing here? Even if you aren't going to participate, haven't all the members of the Knights been released to spectate?" Eugene inquired. "That's why we're here," Seal claimed. "We've come to pick you and Lady Carmen up." "My apologies, but unfortunately, I won't be able to hang around in comfort with you," Eugene said regretfully. "Why not?" Seal complained. "Because I've decided to participate in the competition," Eugene replied without any trace of hesitation or worry. Seal and Desra's eyes widened in amazement. Ever since 300 years ago, the Lionheart clan had taken the entire sprawling forest on the western border of Ceres as their domain, and no other noble estates were located on the outskirts of their family's territory. In other words, the field the competition was taking place in wasn't actually part of the Lionheart clan's private property. This area belonged to Kiel as part of the lands directly owned by the emperor. As this whole confrontation had stemmed from some trivial disputes, no more blood than necessary needed to be shed. During this competition, the participants had to make sure to always respect each other's honor and keep to the rules of chivalry. While that may have been the original priority of the organizers, none of the spectators who had gathered to watch the competition cared about that. There were hundreds of eyes watching to ensure that all the participants in this competition behaved honorably to each other, kept to the rules of chivalry, and restrained themselves from any unnecessary bloodshed. Most of these spectators were aristocrats of at least some individual prestige within Kiel, and even those who didn't have their own titles were merchants whose wealth had granted them a status that could not be ignored. Rather than dull things like honor or chivalry, their eyes were full of interest as they anticipated the upcoming battles between the two knightly orders. The White Dragon Knights, who served directly under the imperial family, and the Lionheart Knights, whose prestigious record had first begun 300 years ago, would face each other head-on. Until now, there had never once been a direct confrontation between the Imperial Knights and the knightly orders that served the nobility of Kiel. Usually, it blows over before an all-out confrontation occurs. This wasn't just the case for conflicts between the Imperial Knights and noble knights either. The noble knightly orders usually didn't fight among themselves either, as a direct conflict between the knightly orders could easily lead to a battle for each other's territory. Therefore, any conflict between knightly orders always adhered to these rules. Any dispute must always be founded on just causes, duels should be neatly arranged to not leave any regrets, and both sides were expected to show respect to each other to keep the loser from being overly humiliated. Like this, any conflicts that arose would not exceed the scale of a 1-versus-1 duel, and the mobilization of the entire knightly order into the field was expressly forbidden without the permission of their noble patrons. This conflict was caused by the White Dragon Knights in the first place, so the Lionheart Knights have been in the right from the very start of all this. However, the White Dragon Knights who serve His Majesty can't be the first to bow their heads. That might be the case, but this is just a rumor spreading inside the Imperial Palace. But His Majesty might be planning on escalating this into an all-out war. What kind of nonsense? As you may know, not long ago, there was an internal conflict between family members over in the Uklas mountain range, within the Lionheart clan's domain. There weren't many casualties, but the prestige of the Lionheart clan, which has prided itself on being the strongest martial clan in the entire continent, has fallen to the bottom. They have even begun to abolish their old traditions to attempt to rectify this and restore the family's power. The one leading this conversation was Marquis Blezico, a noble famous for the broad reach of his social circles, which even extended to the various churches. Lowering his voice as low as he could as if he was telling some great secret, the Marquis whispered, "The Lionheart clan is a prestigious aristocratic family that can even be called the strongest pillar of Kiel. Their ancestor, the Great Vermouth, was a great hero who will forever leave his name in the history of the continent. If such a clan were to begin to capsize, just how depressed would His Majesty be?" His listeners gasped in understanding. "Ah." Blezico further elaborated, "Through this competition, His Majesty intends to confirm whether or not the Lionheart clan has managed to make even the slightest progress in correcting its slow downfall. That is why he has allowed everyone here to observe the competition so that they can confirm it for themselves. Even if the Knights of the White Lion were to defeat the White Dragon Knights in this competition, His Majesty would still be very pleased with this outcome." Conversations filled with such content flowed throughout the entire crowd of spectators. As if it would be so easy to understand His Majesty's true intentions, Alchester muttered to himself, only for the man beside him to pick up the topic. "It's not like we really need to understand His most sublime will." The man changed topics. "It's true that the Lionheart clan has been going through a lot of storms lately, isn't it? This competition might stem from a dispute between our knightly orders, but it isn't bad to have an all-out confrontation like this in order to confirm the true power of the Lionheart clan." It was the Black Lion Knights who suffered from the latest incident. The Knights of the White Lion who serve the direct line haven't suffered any damage, Alcester reminded the man. Yes, I'm aware of that. However, these knights who have sworn allegiance to a family that has started cracking apart from the inside, will they really be as exceptional as the reputation and tradition that they have inherited? The man questioned doubtfully as he looked towards the opposing side with a thin smile. On the other side of the field, the flags of the Lionheart clan were fluttering. Both the White Lion Knights in their grey uniforms and Black Lion Knights in their black uniforms were present for the competition. In the center stood the patriarch, Gilead, riding a black horse. Don't look down on the Lionheart clan, Alcester said. They are the martial clan that has reigned at the top of the empire for the past 300 years. Among all the knights fascinated by their reputation, only those with exceptional skills are carefully selected to join them and receive further training to become members of the Knights of the White Lion. Alcester was actually offended by the man's blatant disrespect for the Lionheart clan. Although he had sworn absolute loyalty to the Emperor as the leader of the White Dragon Knights, as a knight himself, Alcester still respected the Great Vermouth, and was fascinated by his legend. If I really did look down on them, I wouldn't have even participated in this competition, the man eventually responded. This was one of the captains of the White Dragon Knights, Ebolt Magius. Ebolt continued, regardless of whether this competition ends in our victory or defeat, it's necessary to get a more accurate understanding of the Lionheart clan's strength, even if it's just for the sake of the Unity Conference being held next year. But that wasn't the only reason that this conference was being held. The Emperor had also spoken to Alcester privately about his goals for this competition. No matter how heroic their lineage may be, the Lionheart clan was still just a noble family. Wasn't it excessive for such a family to hold enough power to field 2 whole knightly orders, with 160 knights in one order and 60 knights in the other? Was it really right for a hero from 300 years ago and his legacy to receive more respect than the current reigning emperor? That was why the Emperor wanted to put pressure on the Lionhearts. Even if they did end up losing the competition, the White Dragon Knights wouldn't lose much. Their defeat would also work out as an example of the Emperor's care. Such an idea had already been sowed throughout the spectators in advance. However, what if they won? Then the whole world would know that the Lionheart clan's fortunes had indeed declined and that the blood of the hero had now thinned out. Should there be any deserters from the White Lion Knights as a result of this, the Emperor would be sure to generously embrace them and provide a place for them in his knightly order. Any regrets? Carmen asked. She was also sitting on a black horse beside Gilead. The hem of her coat swished as she surveyed the open field in front of them. What do you mean? Gilead asked. I'm talking about proposing this competition in the first place, Carmen clarified. Gilead smiled wryly as he admitted. His Majesty was being a bit too outspoken. It's because this peace has lasted too long, Carmen sighed. Poof. Carmen flicked open her lighter and placed a cigar in her mouth before continuing. Although he's slowly built up more and more power, he doesn't have anywhere to release it. That said, there are a lot of considerations that need to be made before starting a war. But when even the Sultan of Nahama has started to drip his drool here and there because his belly is full of oil, you'd better believe that our majestic emperor drools just as much. That's quite the dangerous claim to make, Gilead observed. Is there something wrong with what I've just said? Even if you've become the emperor of an empire, you should still know how to be content in moderation. If our ancestor hadn't laid down roots in the Kiel Empire 300 years ago, do you really think that Kiel would have been able to retain its status as an empire during those chaotic times? Carmen observed cynically. I expect that the size of their territory would have been reduced by a little, Gilead eventually agreed. Carmen snorted. That's right. Kiel has a lot of enemies. If our clan hadn't immediately blocked the barbarians in the southern rainforest, then the Imperial Knights, whom His Majesty is so proud of, would have needed to take over our duty. Patriarch, you understand what I'm saying, right? Gilead was silent. The Lionheart clan has been protecting Kiel for the past 300 years, without receiving any official titles for doing so. Still, His Majesty, whose belly is so full of oil, does not appreciate our hard work and seeks to target us at our time of weakness, trampling on our family's name and coveting our power. Carmen delivered these words with cold anger. Although she had retained the appearance of a woman in her 20s, Carmen was still Gilead's aunt. This was reflected in the way Carmen encouraged him. So Patriarch, there's no need to regret proposing this competition. This is the decision that you have made as the head of the household. The great hero's blood that flows through our veins has never thinned, and the Lionheart clan remains unbroken despite the harsh storms it has weathered. That's right, we're just like a pine tree that weathers the roughest storms. But what does a pine tree have to do with anything? Gilead felt the need to ask such a question, but in the end he managed to keep it from bursting out. Having experienced this sort of thing throughout his childhood, he knew full well that affirmations and silence were the most effective means of communicating with Carmen. I don't regret it, Gilead eventually declared. As you've said, Aunt, someone needed to make a decision. And this decision is something that I, as the patriarch of the family, chose to make. Don't call me Aunt, Carmen immediately snapped. Yes, Lady Carmen. And why would I have any regrets in the first place? I believe in the knights who have sworn their loyalty to the Lionheart clan. Even if their last name isn't Lionheart and the blood of the Lionheart family doesn't flow through their veins, they are still the knights of the Lionheart clan, the ones who have sworn allegiance to the Lionheart family, Gilead declared proudly. The White Dragon Knights were called the best knights in the Empire. Even Gilead was fully aware of their reputation. However, he didn't believe that the White Lion Knights were in any way inferior to them. Also, Gilead continued as he looked ahead with a wry smile, I honestly can't imagine the sight of that child losing. There were 9 knights of the White Lion who would be participating in this competition. Eugene was standing at their center. Don't push yourself too hard, Eugene advised these knights. Crack crack. As Eugene slowly cracked and loosened the knuckles of one hand, his other hand was tucked inside his cloak, inspecting his weapons. Our opponents are the best knightly order in this empire, Eugene warned them. But his words sounded like they were spoken without any real conviction. Or at least that's how it seemed to the other knights. The White Lion Knights were well aware of what an absurd and inexplicable monster this young master of theirs was. They were so outclassed by him that they couldn't even hold any envy or jealousy toward Eugene. In addition to his innate talents, Eugene had managed to achieve the results by not missing even a single day of training. Their young master, who was only 20 years old this year, had already received the knight's recognition for both his talent and hard work. Should I go out there as well? Cyan proposed hopefully. It's obvious that will just draw unfavorable comparisons between you two. Don't be selfish and just stay here, brother, Seal chided him. Cyan made a sullen expression and glared at the back of Eugene's head as he complained, that bastard has no humanity, absolutely none. Although I know that some people can be extremely talented, isn't that just going too far? Your jealousy is ugly, Seal commented. Have you only been watching us for a day or so? It's already been 7 years since I first started feeling jealous of that bastard. Why make a fuss about it now? Even when admitting his faults, brother, you still look so ugly. In any case, just the fact that he's so talented is inhumane. Look at me. I'm only moderately talented, so I'm overflowing with humanity. Did you know? I'm actually more popular with the Knights of the White Lion than Eugene. Cyan first shrugged slightly and then proudly boasted in front of Seal. Since he has so many drawbacks, it must make them want to take care of him even more, Seal muttered to herself. What did you just say? Cyan asked. I didn't say anything, Seal denied. Seal was definitely correct. The attitudes that the knights sworn to the main family held towards Eugene and Cyan were very different but still positive. It was all thanks to Eugene's repeated declarations that he had no desire for the seat of the patriarch, and Scylla's decades-long efforts to win over the members of the household, and Cyan's own efforts to improve himself without succumbing to his own feelings of inferiority towards Eugene. Eugene checked the rules, so anyways, if I win I can just call out my next opponent and continue fighting, right? Yes, Hazard, the captain of the 2nd Division of the Knights of the White Lion, replied with a nod. If you run out of stamina or are left in an injured state, it's alright if you don't challenge the next opponent and just leave the ring. This isn't a fight to the death after all. Hazard paused for a moment and looked around. Judging from this atmosphere, it has practically become just a friendly match without any stakes, Hazard observed. Even though they're the ones who picked a fight in the first place, Eugene said with a snort as he unbuckled his cloak. At this action, Mare stuck her head out from inside the cloak to ask, Are you going to fight without your cloak? I only need to use a single sword. That means I don't need to wear my cloak, Eugene explained. Mare complained, But that means I can't help Sir Eugene. I'm not going to use any magic either. Didn't I just tell you that all I needed was a sword? Eugene repeated himself. Really? If that's the case, is it all right if I stay outside the cloak and watch the duel from the side? Mare requested. Since when did you need to ask me for permission for something like that? Eugene grumbled as he placed the cloak down beside him. Then Layman, who had been standing behind them, hurriedly ran up and picked up Eugene's cloak. Layman began, instead of the young master going out personally, I can. Eugene cut him off. What qualifies you to do so? Just go over there and take care of my father. Eugene waved Layman off as he sent a glance toward Gerhard. Sitting on his own horse, Gerhard was looking down at Eugene with eyes full of emotion. This was his first time seeing his son look so impressive on the battlefield, attracting everyone's attention like he had a spotlight shining down on him. If father ends up being so moved that he starts crying, get your handkerchief ready, Eugene ordered. Understood, Layman acquiesced. If you let him get closer because he can't see me fighting, then I'll give you a ride on a wooden horse, free. Got it? Eugene threatened. A wooden horse? Layman repeated in confusion. He didn't have any real reason to do so, but seeing Gerhard with such an emotional face made Eugene feel that he should just start the fight ahead of schedule. Well, the purpose of getting involved in this is to attract Lord Alchester's interest after all, so this should only help with that, Eugene persuaded himself. Eugene fastened the long sword he had taken out beforehand onto his waist and looked back at the White Lion Knights who would be participating in the competition. Well then, I'll be heading out first, Eugene informed them. Huh. Hazard and the other knights gaped, unable to hide their bewildered expressions. I don't think there's any need for that. Allow me to go out first, Hazard offered. That will give you a chance to figure out the other side's strength and decide when you want to fight. Nope, just let me go, Eugene demanded, shaking his head firmly. Then without waiting for a response he started walking forward. At first the spectators didn't recognize Eugene. As the foster child of the main family, there were a lot of rumors swirling around him. The youngest member to have ever entered Akron and the master of the Wise Sienna's staff. Such unconventional rumors abounded around him, but Eugene had never once shown up to a church service, a ball, or any other type of social gathering. However, he didn't go unrecognized for too long, as the spectators soon realized who Eugene was. He was wearing the formal dress of the Lionheart clan, with the Lionheart sigil on his left chest. That, along with his shaggy gray hair and golden eyes, was enough to reveal who he was. Is that Eugene Lionheart? Could he be coming out to give a public greeting? The spectators let out a muffled roar as they watched Eugene stride forward. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Eugene was currently the most famous young man in the entire Lionheart clan. There might be a lot of rumors swirling around him, but Eugene was a mysterious celebrity who had never once appeared at any of the social gatherings regularly attended by the Kiel nobles. As a result, the spectators couldn't help but hold a lot of expectations in their eyes as they watched Eugene. The White Dragon Knights had also started to mutter among themselves. As their leader, Alchester in particular, was greatly flustered as he stared accusingly at Carmen and Gilead, who were standing behind Eugene. Perhaps noticing this gaze, Gilead smiled wryly and shrugged his shoulders. Instead of laughing like she wanted to, Carmen proudly held up her DuPont lighter and flicked the lid open and closed in an eye-catching manner. Really now? Alchester let out a short sigh and shook his head. The list of participating knights hadn't been disclosed to each other. But he hadn't expected that the young master of the main family, Eugene Lionheart specifically, would step forward to represent them. I can't go out and challenge him now, Alchester thought in worry. While he was busy worrying about this, Ebolt, standing beside Alchester, climbed off his horse. He put one hand on the hilt of the sword at his waist and confidently strode forward. Ebolt. Alchester called out in question. Let me go first, Ebolt simply replied without halting his steps.